So my first answer to you is you shouldn't go back to sex as something that you do to stop your partner from sulking, or sex as a means of proving your love. Sex shouldn't be something you're doing to try to keep the peace. You're listening to In Bed with Science, a sex podcast. I'm Lee Noren, a sex therapist with a Master of Science in Sexology and over 13 years of coaching, counselling and therapy experience. Today, I'm answering an audience question about mismatched libidos and what happens when trying to want sex starts to feel completely draining, and what to do when you've tried everything and more to meet your partner's desire for sex and intimacy, but nothing ever feels like quite enough. But first, do you have a sex or relationship question you want to ask, but you're not quite sure where to turn? Now's your chance. I'm looking for thoughtful, personal questions about things like intimacy, mismatched libidos, emotional disconnect, and struggles with sexual pleasure and desire. Specifically, those messy, non-Hollywood experiences that we all have but rarely talk about. And I'll be answering them in upcoming episodes of the podcast with both compassion and scientific insight. Submit your story or question anonymously, or with your name if you'd like, and it might be featured in a future episode. Today's question is from a woman in a heterosexual relationship where they've had mismatched levels of desire for years. And this led her to try all kinds of things to get her desire back. And now she's at a place where she doesn't want to try anymore. So let's listen to the question.
I feel like a well-scraped peanut butter jar. There's just nothing left to give, and I'm tired of trying. Whether we had sex 4 days a week, or whether I spent every evening engaged in cuddling and massaging and other forms of intimacy, every week contained periods of sulking, silent treatments, withdrawal, and rejection tears. And interestingly, the only thing that ever stopped it was me saying I won't participate anymore. After 2 months of no sex, he's finally not treating me with a constant flood of disappointment and demand. So why would I ever go back?
So, first off, I think it's pretty clear from what you've described that you've really taken your partner's wants very seriously, right? You've tried everything and then some to meet him where he's at in his desire for physical closeness and sex. And you've worked so hard that in the end, I think, of course you're depleted. Of course you're exhausted. You're saying that you've tried so much that you literally have nothing else left to give. And so in your trying to meet him halfway, or really all of the way, you've essentially lost contact with yourself and your own wants and needs. And I think this depletion you're describing is so important to listen to, because in relationships with mismatched libidos, the partner with less desire can very easily become framed as the problem, because they become the one that needs to work harder, to initiate more, to want sex more. And in the case of a relationship where the low desire partner still wants to be in the relationship and wants to work things out and has previously enjoyed sex, this isn't unreasonable. Not because you're the problem, but because your partner's wants should matter to you. However, you've already gone above and beyond that. You've had sex 4 days a week, you've spent evenings cuddling and massaging and offering all kinds of intimacy, and you've tried, and based on what you're saying, it was never enough. So when you ask me, why would I ever go back? From my perspective, you're not asking, why would I ever go back to sex? What I think you're asking is, why would I go back to this dynamic where my partner makes me feel like I'm failing all of the time? And so my first answer to you is, you shouldn't go back to sex as something that you do to stop your partner from sulking, or sex as a means of proving your love. Sex shouldn't be something you're doing to try to keep the peace. The only reason to work towards sex again is if sex can become something that makes the relationship closer and more intimate and more rewarding for both of you. where sex becomes your place to have fun and connect. But if sex is the arena through which you constantly have to prove that your partner is important to you, or you manage their disappointment, then of course you don't want to go back, and you shouldn't. And this is probably why these 2 months without sex feels so freeing to you, because it's not just that you're no longer having sex or being intimate in other ways, it's that there's no longer this flood of disappointment and demand. And those aren't the same thing. So while it sometimes appears to us as if the absence of sex is the relief, it's really more the absence of the pressure surrounding sex that's the relief. And that makes sense, because if every week used to contain some level of sulking or silent treatment or withdrawal or rejection tears, and now that's stopped, it's like you can finally breathe again, or, you can finally actually fill that peanut butter jar back up. That constant trying and managing is gone. And you've told him, I'm not going to be participating in this anymore. And it sounds like to me, when I read your question, like this is a boundary you've really been itching to set for quite a long time. So it's really no small feat that you've been able to do that now. That being said, relief only gets you so far. So just because it feels better right now, it doesn't necessarily mean that the relationship is headed in the right direction that you want it to. And sometimes we're just not ready for that, right? We just need to stop something that is damaging here and now and land in that for a bit. But if you're looking at, well, what does our future look like? Then I think it's important to address this piece too. So when our partner stops with all of the pressuring behaviors, it feels good. And it is good, because it can mean that they've actually understood how their behaviors have been making us feel. But when that happens, it can also mean that our partner has given up. So in couples work, we sometimes talk about how conflict can mean that there's still that love and care left. Not always healthy love or safe love, but there's still engagement, right? It's worth fighting over something. And sometimes when the fighting stops, it doesn't mean that the issues are resolved. It means that one or both people have given up. So even if the absence of fighting can feel better, I think it's worth asking whether things are calmer because something's genuinely changed, or because you've kind of stopped reaching out to one another. And so this then means needing to work out where you're moving on from here, because as I said before, you can't go back and you shouldn't, but what does the future look like? And what future do you both want to work toward? The relationship behaviors you described from your partner are really common, but that doesn't make them healthy. So sulking, silent treatment, withdrawal, and rejection tears can all be ways of managing the pain of wanting sex and intimacy and not getting it. But they also create pressure, and over time that pressure can become damaging to your partner and to the relationship as a whole. While it may be easy to simply place blame on a partner who acts this way, I think it's really important to first understand why they do this. So first off, the dynamic you've described and the way your partner experiences sexual rejection tells me that sex isn't necessarily just about sex to him. It seems like sex might be his primary way of feeling important and loved and cared for. Maybe it's even his preferred way of kind of unwinding after a stressful day, and he has no other ways of doing that. He hasn't found other coping mechanisms yet. Or maybe it's a place where he becomes the person he really wants to be, and maybe that feels like freedom to him. And when this is the case, and we've had different wants for a long time in a relationship, the partner with more easily accessed desire can sometimes end up almost like sexualizing all of their non-sexual needs. And what I mean by this is, feeling loved is absolutely something you can get through sex, but you can also get it through lots of other things too, right? So spending quality time together, getting interesting questions from your partner, sharing new experiences, cuddling without the pressure that it has to lead to sex, or being silly and playful with one another. But when sex becomes all-encompassing and it's the primary way or the only way that we can experience togetherness, it's no surprise that sexual rejection hits so hard. So unless we're talking about a relationship that is abusive, emotionally abusive, physically, sexually abusive, I think we can have compassion for the pain underneath the reactions that he's been displaying, while still saying very clearly that sulking, silent treatment, and withdrawal are all really unproductive ways of handling that pain. We know that clinically, and we know that through research. A lot of what you're describing actually overlaps with what the Gottman Institute calls the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse. Essentially, they're 4 relationship communication behaviors that we know erode relationships when they're repeated over time. And these are criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. So silent treatment and withdrawal can be forms of stonewalling. Essentially, stonewalling is when one partner shuts down and kind of you shut the other partner out emotionally. And when that happens after sexual rejection, the message that it imparts to the other person is, if you say no to me, I will disappear from you emotionally. And that creates pressure, even if that might not be what you're trying to do, right? You're not consciously trying to say that to your partner. You might simply be trying to deal with the pain of rejection, but to the other partner it signals, you have to have sex with me, otherwise there will be consequences. Sulking can also become its own kind of pressure because it makes the other person responsible for your disappointment. And rejection tears, they're a little more complicated simply because crying isn't something that's a part of those kind of 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And you can't tell someone that they're not allowed to feel sad after being rejected. In fact, it's a deeply human response to feel sad after rejection. That being said, how we as a person deal with our sadness and our tears matters a great deal. Do we come together afterwards? Do we explain what's going on to our partner? Maybe we say, I just want you to know that me being sad doesn't mean I'm placing blame on you. It's just a bit difficult for me to deal with right now. Could we hug together maybe, just so I don't feel that we're miles apart? Right? So how we come together or spend our time apart after rejection matters hugely to the trajectory of all the future sort of sexual initiatives and the relationship at large. And so it's so important here as a partner who feels rejected to consistently let the other person know that their behavior in no way means that they want you to say yes when you're not 100% yes. And that's one way of tempering that pressure a bit. Because at the end of the day, the foundation for desire relies on there always being that freedom to be able to say no. And if you can't say no without being punished, you can't really ever say yes totally freely. Now, so much of the advice out there about different levels of desire often assumes that the solution is for the lower desire partner to try harder. So maybe try scheduling sex or being more affectionate or trying to meet the other person halfway. And this isn't unreasonable if sex is something you've enjoyed in the past and that you want to have. But you can't try and meet your partner halfway if they don't also try and meet you halfway. Granted, in this situation, I only have your words here, so I don't know what he would say if he was here. But if we're just kind of basing everything on what you've described, it sounds to me like you're the only one who's been stretching and adapting and accommodating. And then you're being met with the message that this still isn't good enough, you're not enough. And so what happens then is you're being pulled further and further away from any semblance of desire or wanting sex. You might even be in a place right now where you don't even want sex in the future because sex has become so equated with pressure and stress and negativity, and there's no longer any air to fan the flame of desire. It's been suffocated. So if I were working with you, I wouldn't begin with focusing on how you could want sex more. I would want to start with a question of what has sex come to mean between the two of you? Because if sex has turned into the only proof that you love him and that he is important to you and the only proof that the relationship is okay, then sex has become too important. And I say that as a sex therapist who believes that sex can be really important. And if sex has become all about pressure and obligation and a barometer of how successful you are as a partner at meeting his wants, then sex has also become way too important. You're both probably depleted right now in different ways, but I'm sure this has been weighing on him immensely too. So if I was seeing you as a couple, I would want to know, when did sex become this loaded? Has it always been this way, or did something change? So was there a time where sex felt easier to both of you, or more mutual and fun and like something you both wanted? Or has sex always carried with it some level of demand or expectation or disappointment? I'd want to know if this is a pattern you've experienced in previous relationships too, and if he has as well. Because what we know about this kind of dynamic surrounding sex is that if we don't tend to it, if we don't work through it and understand it, it tends to repeat itself even when we meet someone new. So was there a gradual shift from sex as fun to sex as pressure? Or was there something that happened specifically, right? Was there a moment of intense stress or conflict or resentment or grief or bodily changes, pain, parenthood struggles, betrayal, a period where something changed significantly? Because low desire or not wanting sex as much as your partner or starting to want sex more and more and more doesn't occur in a vacuum. And then I would want to ask both of you what sex means. So kind of what I was talking about before. So not how often you think you should be having it, but what it actually means to you. Because while we're talking about the same thing, right? We're talking about sex, it likely signifies something completely different to you. And I would also want to ask about your relationship outside of sex, because when we have issues like this in the bedroom and a dynamic where one partner is punished, either subconsciously or consciously, it tends to affect the rest of the relationship. So sometimes that's where it starts. So do you spend time together? Do you enjoy one another? And what do you like doing when sex is not on the table? When do you feel most heard by one another, most respected, most drawn to one another in a non-sexual way? And are there moments where you still feel like teammates? Are there moments where you laugh or you're silly together? Or has the pressure become so big that it's like it's sort of swallowed up the whole relationship? And then finally, I'd want to ask you this. Is there anything that would make it worth it to you to explore wanting sex again? Not because you're going to go back to what it was or to force yourself to meet all of his wants, but exploring simply whether sex could be interesting to you. And this needs to be answered honestly. And maybe you're like, well, I don't know. It's not clear cut. Or maybe your answer hinges on other things like, yes, I would actually be open to working my way back to sex because I used to enjoy it, but only if he handles rejection in a different way. Or yes, but only if we agree to go to sex therapy together. Or yes, but only if general affection can exist without sex looming over our heads. And maybe the answer is no. Maybe you don't want sex again, or you don't want it with him specifically. Maybe there's this wall of resentment that feels impossible for you to tear down and that you don't even want to try to tear down right now. If there's some part of you that wants to see whether sex could become possible again, then we would start with the conditions around sex before we even start with the sex itself. So the pressure would have to be eradicated. This is what I always do with my clients where there are mismatched levels of desire and there's some level of pressure, stress, and anxiety surrounding sex, right? So we would want to remove silent treatment and work on other ways of dealing with rejection, taking sex off of the table for a period of time while we work on other things to try to get you to come back again and be a bit closer before you attempt to have sex. And he would need to learn how to express that sex matters to him without your body feeling like it's responsible to meet his wants or to soothe him. And you would need to be honest too, and likely find other ways of dealing with how you say no and how you communicate surrounding sex. Because whenever it's become this difficult, there's often a dynamic where the communication has become faulty for both partners, right? And we place blame on one another. This doesn't mean you haven't been trying really hard. You've been working incredibly hard, possibly too hard, because it sounds like he hasn't been meeting you halfway. Yet there's still communication patterns that you likely need to both work on. And you really need to understand one another, because both of you are right and none of you are wrong. So you're entitled to not want sex, and he's entitled to want sex. That being said, there are better and worse ways of dealing with this really common situation. And if you're both open to exploring how to reduce resentment and to reduce that pressure and come together emotionally and sexually, then I think all of the things I've been talking about in this episode would be a great starting place. And so this is where seeing someone together can obviously be really helpful, because over time, when we get to the point that you're describing, walls have been built and hurt has accumulated, and it can be a struggle to talk about it without making the other person the enemy, no matter how hard you try. And then there's the honesty piece, because you don't owe your partner sex ever. But if you know that you don't want a sexual relationship with him again, and you know that you don't want to work towards one, then he also deserves to know that. Not because he's entitled to sex, but because he's entitled to know the type of relationship that he's saying yes to. And you deserve honesty from him too. So if he knows he can't stay in a relationship where sex is rare, or sex doesn't happen, or where sex is only possible under other conditions, then he needs to acknowledge that through language and words that aren't blaming, but simply stating how he feels, so that you can make a choice about what type of relationship you're saying yes to staying in. And if you want to stay together, and if you want to work on all of this, then ultimately the goal needs to be finding a way where you can come together without you or him sort of disappearing inside of the relationship. And whether you want to work on this or not, and what you're prepared to do to work on it, are really only questions that you and him have the answers to. But I do want you to know that this kind of dynamic is common. There are ways to work with it, but it can be really difficult when it's infected. And I think therefore it's important to know that it's not about quick tips and tricks. It's not about you simply trying harder, trying to meet his wants. It's about removing the pressure. It's about communicating in a different way. And it's about understanding what sex means to you and what you want it to mean to you, and whether you want to work on it together. So, today we've explored what happens when not having sex starts to feel like relief, and why that relief is so important. Now, what stood out in this audience question wasn't that she'd stopped trying because she didn't care. That's rarely the case. She'd tried so hard that she'd become depleted, and nothing she did felt like enough. So her question was, why would I ever go back? And my answer is, I don't think she should. She shouldn't go back to that. She shouldn't go back to a sexual dynamic where her no has emotional consequences, and her yes becomes about managing him and keeping the peace. So here's what to take away from this episode if you're in a similar situation. I want you to take that relief seriously. And it may not be the absence of sex that's producing the relief, it may be the absence of the pressure. Relief also doesn't automatically mean that the relationship is repaired, but it does tell us that the old dynamic wasn't healthy. Notice the relationship behaviors: sulking, silent treatment, withdrawal, stonewalling, after rejection. All of those are examples of some of the most damaging communication behaviors in relationships. And when they happen consistently, a no to sex doesn't feel safe or free, which means a yes can't be either. Don't start with, how do I want more sex? In a situation like this, the better question is, What does sex come to mean to us? Has it become the only way I can feel validated and loved? Has it become the place where obligation and pressure and failure are the strongest? And what did sex used to mean to me and to us? Look at the relationship as a whole, not just the bedroom. Do you still spend time together? Do you feel heard and respected? Do you feel drawn to one another outside of sex? And are there still moments of friendship and humor and being silly together? Because rebuilding your sex life when it's gotten to this point often involves rebuilding your general relationship too. Because oftentimes these things are also lacking, and rebuilding your sex life when it's gotten to this point often involves rebuilding your general relationship too, but you often need to work on both. And finally, be really honest about where you want to go from here. You don't owe your partner sex, but if you know that you don't want a sexual relationship again, your partner deserves that honesty. And if your partner knows that they can't be in a relationship where sex is rare or absent, you deserve that honesty too. Not through the sulking and the punishment or the emotional withdrawal, but through open, honest communication that's respectful. Sex shouldn't be something one person gives to manage the other person's disappointment. It should be something that both people can choose freely. And if you can't choose it freely, you really need to start with understanding why sex stopped being something you wanted in the first place. Because that answer holds the key to how you're going to be able to move forward. That's it for In Bed with Science. Please remember that everything shared in this episode is for informational purposes only and isn't a substitute for medical advice or therapy. For personal support, please reach out to a qualified professional. Now, if you're looking to reduce that pressure and stress and possibly want sex again, you can work one-to-one with me in my online program, Redesire. Click on the link in the show notes to head to my website. This is what I work with all of the time. This is what I specialize in. And believe me when I say, I'm never going to try and get you to have sex that you don't want to have. It's about reducing the pressure and understanding before we even start to rebuild your sex life, if that's what you end up wanting to do. Thanks for listening.